took sadistic pleasure in raping children wherever he went in the world.
He said that he had one more test to give me, that God wanted him to administer one more test for me. And it's there that he sodomized me.
Few survivors of his abuses mourned his death in August 1997. He was finally gone from their lives. At least he was until March this year.
In 1975, Bishop Francis McClure.
I know two people who have died by suicide as a result of being abused by Brendan Smyth after 1975.
I did act.
But Sean Brady chose not to report Brendan Smyth's crimes to the police in 1975.
Hundreds, perhaps 1,000 children were abused by Smyth because Brady did not do the right thing.
In 1994 and 1995, we exposed Brendan Smyth, a vicious, violent sexual predator who destroyed children and their families. He got away with it for almost 50 years, but only now do we fully understand not only his depravity, but the squalid and debased cover-up by educated men of the church, men with doctorates in canon law. Bishops, archbishops and cardinals knowingly and deliberately hid the sins of the vile abuse by rapist priests to protect the good name of the church. So tonight, our story begins when Brendan Smyth was sent to the United States for the first time in 1965. By this time, his religious order and the Catholic Church had been aware of his paedophilia for nearly 20 years. Helen McGonigal was just 6 when she was first abused by Father Brendan Smyth.
So there's nobody in the classroom but me and Smyth. In that classroom, that's when he pulled up my skirt. He had his hand, he put his hand in my underwear, and he told me his finger was the finger of God, and he penetrated me with his finger.
Father Brendan Smyth was sent to Providence, Rhode Island in the United States in 1965. The church didn't bother to tell parishioners about Father Brendan Smyth's past as a child rapist. However, it didn't take their children long to find out.
I was taken into an area that seemed like it was in the basement of the church, and into a room that had maybe boxes or file cabinet. And in that room, I was abused by him there. There was a chair there. I was alone in that room with him, and he had his fingers in my underwear again, but he also had me perform fellatio.
Sent home from Providence in early 1968 after complaints about child abuse, Smyth received psychiatric treatment in Belfast. Brendan Smyth epitomised this system of cover-up. His religious order knew he was a child rapist from the late 40s, but for almost 50 years continued to move him around the globe. Often his order did this in collusion with the wider Catholic Church. But cover-ups are not cheap. So far, the Catholic Church has paid $3 billion in the United States alone to settle claims against paedophile priests.
So you can imagine, if we knew the whole picture in the United States, if victims in all 50 United States were able to bring civil action, the amount of the payout by the Catholic Church would be absolutely mind-boggling. And $3 billion already is a mind-boggling figure.
Some dioceses went bankrupt. Others were flush and paid cash. Boston sold the Archbishop's residence and 43 acres of land for $100 million to settle 500 paedophile cases. But then they also got rid of the Archbishop, Cardinal Bernard Law. The people of Boston were angry. Cardinal Law shielded 220 paedophile priests for 18 years, during which time they raped and abused 1,000 children.
I was just enraged, and I had this sense that I wanted to confront Cardinal Law. And it was so naive because this man already knew of at least 200 Boston priests who had abused children. Nothing I could say was going to shame him.
I think also the severity of the abuse is something that I couldn't have even imagined until I began working on this. This isn't a matter of children being hugged inappropriately or touched inappropriately. These are situations in which a boy will be anally raped and go back through the streets from the rectory to his own home with blood in his trousers.
The second crisis is the widespread and massive cover-up of child sex crimes by Catholic bishops. They knowingly concealed child predators. They knowingly gave sanctuary to child rapists in the Catholic Church and put more children in harm's way, knowing that this priest would go on to rape and abuse again.
Protection of this kind allowed Brendan Smyth to return to Rhode Island in 1969 to resume his assaults on Helen at school and in the church as well. Worst still, he becomes a tenant in Helen's street. Now Smyth is perfectly placed to note when Helen's father is away on business.
He got into my bedroom because my sister had gone out and left the door unlocked. He came in and he was on top of me in my own bed and he sodomized me. All I just remember is having him on top of me, a painful experience. I saw him another time in the bedroom over my sister, doing the same thing to my sister.
As she prepared to sue the church, Helen decided to contact a childhood friend, Jeff Thomas. Helen's call triggers in Jeff total recall of the bad memories of Smyth that he'd been suppressing for 3 decades.
I was having difficulty with dreams coming back to me and not knowing the meaning of the dreams. I was having difficulty with my marriage, issues in my marriage. And what ended up happening was I got a phone call one day from my brother, and he had heard from an old neighbor of mine that there was problems with somebody that used to live in our neighborhood.
That was Helen McGonigal.
That was Helen McGonigal, correct.
Jeff and Helen were next-door neighbours in the late 60s through to the 70s. During their childhood friendship, neither knew that the other was also being abused by Smyth.
We came back to the neighborhood here. We walked through Jeff's property. Jeff looked at my house, and I could hear him say under his breath, "She had to have seen." Months passed before he ever told me why he was saying it, and it was because, yes, my mother saw Jeff in his backyard by the stone wall.
Jeff told Helen a long-held secret about her mum the day that Father Brendan Smyth violated him.
He was out in the backyard of my neighbor Helen's house one day, and he said that he had one more test to give me, that God wanted him to administer one more test for me. He led me down my backyard, behind a stone wall, behind Helen's house, and it's there that he sodomized me.
And my mom was looking out a window of our house and saw Smyth.
Helen McGonigal's mom came running out in like a bathrobe and slippers, yelling at Father Smyth, "What are you doing with that boy? What are you doing with that boy?" Father Smyth told me to run along and go back to my house.
Shouted at him, "What are you doing to that little boy?"
And she said the same thing, to go back to my house, which I did. And as I'm leaving the two of them, I can hear her screaming at him.
And Smyth charged up to her and said, "Get out of here, this is church business. Get back into your house."
And in a perverse way, Father Smyth could consider it church business, given that the church was permitting him to go on raping children, rather than report him to the police. Helen's mum was a devout Catholic, and the confrontation with Smyth was a heavy burden.
She just went off the deep end very quickly, in a very quick span of time. And Jeff Thomas's mom told me that even at one point, my mom was so distraught about something, and she's out in the middle of the road here screaming, "The Pope owes me." She was so angry, you know. "The Pope owes me. The Pope owes me." You know, my mom was the kind of person that was given, she was offered a full scholarship to Notre Dame to go to college, and she turned it down because she would never want to take anything from the Catholic Church. So for her to feel so angry, to say, "The Pope owes me," well, the Pope owes us, all of us, and that's the way she felt. That's the way she felt.
Back in Ireland in 1975, Smyth found himself under investigation by Sean Brady, but not reported to the police. In part 2, we asked the question, why did Sean Brady fail to act in 1975 by not reporting Smyth to the police?
I did act. I did act.
Still to come in part 2, Sean Brady's failure to report sex abuser Brendan Smyth to the police. But first to Helen and Jeff in the United States as they continue to battle the psychological damage of abuse that they suffered in the 60s. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Ian Bones has first-hand knowledge of the damage Smyth and paedophiles like him can cause.
Every facet of the individual's life, the way that they react and the way that they focus and cope with relationships or relationships that are not going terribly well, every domain, every facet of the individual's life will be affected in some way. If the trauma was specifically related to a sexual event, that can evoke a very catastrophic reaction in the individual.
I've lost everything that I own. Everything that I held dear is gone. My wife left me with my kids, and in about a 3-day time span, she called me on a Wednesday, said she couldn't handle it anymore, she was going to leave. She was out of the house on Saturday, took my kids away from me that way. That was an event that I never want to visit again. It was very, very difficult.
Helen says Brendan Smyth destroyed her mother's mental health and drove her to an early grave. She blames Smyth for the suicides of her brother Jerry and her abused sister Kathy.
What Smyth did to our family, fractured our family, destroyed it. I mean, destroyed our mother, destroyed my brother. So,
These family tragedies fuel Helen's desire for justice. The church has offered a payoff, but she's refused. Though she is suing the church, she accepts payments from them for her counselling.
We at Manly Stewart have covered over 700 cases.
Pat Wall is a key member of Helen's legal team. Previously, as a young priest and a canon lawyer, he was instructed by his bishop to handle the clean-up and closing down of cases involving paedophile priests. In other words, he implemented the cover-up.
Well, as a priest, all 5 of my assignments had to deal with childhood sexual abuse. That was the ultimate reason why I got moved or why I got assigned to places. And it was all ultimately about the scandal. And what I came to find out, instead of working for a holy institution, I worked for an institution that was wholly concerned about itself and covering it up, almost as if I was working for the mob. And that's when I had to get out.
Tom Doyle was an ambitious priest and canon lawyer at the Vatican Embassy in Washington, until he could no longer tolerate the way bishops used civil courts to grind down their opponents to maintain the cover-up.
So on the one hand, the bishop says, we're so sorry for the harm that's been done, and on the other hand, they keep paying their lawyers millions of dollars to obstruct justice, to embarrass victims, to intimidate them. That goes on all the time. So that's rank hypocrisy as far as I'm concerned.
People who thought they were part of a good religious organisation and found that in fact they were members of an organisation involved in systemic crime. What happens to these people? There is no hand stretched out to help them. There are so many victims in all of this.
Back in Ireland, another of those victims, a woman now living in Canada, was sexually assaulted by Brendan Smyth. In 1997, she lodged papers suing the Catholic Church and Cardinal Sean Brady. The case has only just been settled this year.
He dragged that woman through the courts since 1997. That case was only settled in 2010. Where does it end? When do you stop subjecting people to this prolonged anguish and this suffering, and pretending at the same time that you're a holy man and that you are doing God's work?
The case involving the woman in Canada backfired on Cardinal Brady. It was her lawyers who discovered that in 1975, Sean Brady had taken statements from two teenage boys, aged 14 and 15, who said Father Smyth abused them. And it was Sean Brady who supervised an oath of secrecy taken by the two boys.
Well, here was evidence that as far back as 1975, he had known about the abuse of these two children and furthermore had sworn them to secrecy, which is, it's the essence of the crime. The secrecy, this is our secret, don't tell anybody. This is the thing that the victims have to live with all their lives. And here was the head of the church in Ireland implicated 100%.
In 1975, Bishop Francis McKiernan set up a canonical inquiry to establish firm grounds for withdrawing the faculties, that's the licence to practice as a priest, from Father Brendan Smyth. It took the form of a question and answer sequence under oath before a notary. I was that notary. I didn't have decision-making powers for that in that inquiry, and that inquiry set to work.
The Cardinal said he handed over the paperwork to his boss, Bishop Francis McKiernan.
I insist again, I did act and acted effectively within that inquiry to produce the grounds for removing Father Smyth from ministry, and specifically it was underlined that he was not to hear confessions, and that was very important.
Confessions, my arse.
Samantha was a survivor of Brendan Smyth's abuses from 1974 to 1979.
This guy raped me and he abused me and he took everything that should have been precious to me.
Samantha was absolutely distraught when she responded to Cardinal Brady's comments on a local radio station in the Republic.
If they had done their job right, I wouldn't have been abused by Brendan Smyth. I would have been saved all that torment and torture and loss and everything that goes with that. I would have been saved that. I know two people who have died by suicide as a result of being abused by Brendan Smyth after 1975.
The Cardinal was questioned about why in 1975 he did not act to inform the Gardaí.
I did act.
To contact the state authorities, to contact the guards, the police, to go to the proper authorities. Why did you not do that?
Even today, the appropriate person to do that is the designated person. I was not that person.
Well, he keeps passing it off as being he did his job and passed it on to his superiors. They just kept it between themselves. It's just so hard to take in that somebody knew.
I don't accept Cardinal Brady's explanation. I don't accept the explanation of an SS officer during the Second World War when they were allowing people to go off to be slaughtered. I don't accept the explanation of anyone who stands by idly when children are being sexually abused.
Let's just hear the Cardinal again.
Even today, the appropriate person to do that is the designated person. I was not that person.
Where was the Cardinal in 1994 as the police in Northern Ireland prepared their case against Father Brendan Smyth? Did he share his information with them? Or in 1997, when Brendan Smyth was jailed in Dublin, did he share his information with the Gardaí? Or did the Cardinal simply continue withholding information about the criminal activities of a child rapist? Or perhaps he wasn't the designated person. Andrew Madden not only survived abuse by a priest, but also a campaign by the Dublin Archdiocese to discredit him. He feels Cardinal Brady has persistently failed his moral obligations.
You know, he kept the truth to himself from 1975 for the 18 years that Brendan Smyth was free to carry on abusing children. And even when Brendan Smyth was going through the courts in the 1990s, Sean Brady kept the truth to himself.
The Cardinal didn't seem to have a clear answer when he was asked to explain how taking Smyth's licence to hear confessions would safeguard children.
How would that stop children being abused?
Because he was out of contact with but the responsibility for his behaviour as a priest rests at all times with his religious superior in Kilnacroft.
He had information about a man who was going around raping and abusing children, and he didn't do anything personally about it. He's saying he did his job, he passed it on to his superiors. It wasn't his responsibility, it was because he was an adult and he knew this man was still going around abusing children. He knew that, and he did nothing to stop it.
And he had a moral obligation to make sure that Brendan Smyth wasn't left in a position where he could reoffend. And he can't just abdicate himself of that responsibility and say he told his bishop.
In 1976, just 12 months after Sean Brady's inquiry, Smyth's religious order sent him back to America, this time to Langdon in North Dakota. Because his abuses were not made known to his new hosts, he had pastoral duties, including taking confessions. And of course, he abused. In 1994, we interviewed one survivor who'd received $20,000 from Smyth. Smyth's links with Langdon ended in 1983. However, as a rapist priest from Ireland, he was not alone.
One of the most chilling examples, I think, of how a sexually offending priest thinks and behaves is a deposition taken of Father Oliver O'Grady.
In this clip, O'Grady from Tipperary demonstrates how he would approach a young girl for sex.
How about just use the name Sally?
Okay. Hi Sally, how you doing? Come here, I want to give you a hug. You're a sweetheart, you know that. You're very special to me. I like you a lot.
O'Grady abused hundreds of children during 30 years in the United States.
Tempted to, and often did, maybe raise her dress in a kind of subconscious way, or should I say in a way that she's not aware that I'm doing that, but checking her out at the same time, you know. You get a glimpse of her underwear.
And did you find that arousing?
I did, yes.
O'Grady served 7 years in an American jail. On his release in 2003, he was deported to Ireland.
I will add that I don't think I molested girls that way as much as I would have done boys.
It was Pat Wall who found O'Grady in Ireland and who was present for the video deposition.
What I've found in the last 10 years of working on childhood sexual abuse cases is that the Church has systematically, over the centuries, applied the geographic solution by taking a priest and, after he is offended, moving him to a place where the scandal is not known. And we specifically see this in Ireland, where they will move the priest from Ireland into the United States, into multiple different locations.
Oliver O'Grady remains at large, although he was held in custody briefly this past week in Dublin, arrested and then bailed on charges of possessing pornographic images of children. Like O'Grady, Brendan Smyth had a voracious appetite for taking sexual gratification from children, and to date the Catholic Church has concealed the true extent of the horrific damage they've done to children and their families.
The biggest chance we have for the truth to be told is, a number of factors can make that happen. A courageous public prosecutor can get at the truth and publish blistering investigative reports, as has happened in Philadelphia and New Hampshire, and even in Boston.
Step forward Will Delker, Senior Assistant Attorney General in New Hampshire. In January 2002, he began a criminal investigation into the Diocese of Manchester. He investigated the diocese as he would have investigated malpractice at a normal business.
We tried, again, to think about it. What would we do if this was a regular corporation, a civil corporation, and how would we approach it, and how would we approach this investigation. We were very, very mindful to try to keep the religious aspect of this case, separate from the criminal activity. But I mean, the scope of the problem went on for decades, and that, I mean, certainly in my experience, is something we've never seen before.
Tom Doyle saw this criminal activity firsthand, starting in the 1980s. His Catholic faith was severely challenged when his reports about bishops covering up paedophile priests were ignored.
When I was writing up the first reports, I really believed that once these reports were seen by the right people, once the information was given to the right people, both the leadership of the Catholic Church in the United States and in the Vatican, they would certainly want to do the right thing, because this is horrendous. These are children that are being violated sexually, emotionally, spiritually by priests. And they have bishops covering up for these priests.
There are many bishops in Ireland that have handled these exact same cases. There are many bishops in the US and Australia and all over the world who have handled these exact same cases. And because they were good at handling these cases, they got promoted.
Back in New Hampshire, the bishops were doing everything they could to hamper the investigation, fighting state prosecutors and defying a grand jury subpoena to hand over their secret files on paedophile priests.
They filed a motion to quash, which means basically asking the judge to deny the subpoena, to say they didn't have to comply with it. The judge issued a very scathing order saying that they were obligated to comply, that the grand jury had the power to pursue this, and that if they didn't comply, they would be found in contempt of court.
They weren't worried about the damage to the children or the children's parents. They were worried about the damage to the institutional church, to their control, their power, their income, their financial base.
Will Delker's investigation found enough evidence to convict the Catholic Diocese of Manchester on criminal charges. And amazingly, so strong was the evidence that the Catholic Church could do nothing but enter a plea of guilty.
They had to admit that we would have been able to convict them if we went to trial. They had to agree to allow us to release all of the files and records that we had gathered during the criminal investigation. And they had to agree to have an audit, basically an oversight by our office for 5 years to supervise their implementation of a child protection plan.
This deal saved a bishop from prosecution, although a number of individual priests were prosecuted. However, it wasn't long before the church was backtracking on the deal.
Initially, well, they agreed to these audits, and that was very promising, but very quickly they went back on their agreement. And so we had to fight them in court again and have a judge order them to engage in the type of oversight that we had envisioned.
The civil authorities have dealt with it much more rigorously in the US. If you remember when the Murphy Commission contacted the Papal Nuncio here looking for information for its investigation, the blatant snub that the Commission got, I believe that they felt that that was all right because there was such a cosy relationship in Ireland between the Church and the state.
We only know the truth about what happened in Dublin because the taxpayer spent about €3.5 million on a state inquiry. And it was an inquiry that had the authority to seize documentation if necessary and to compel witnesses to attend. That's why we know the truth about the church in Dublin, which is a church which calls itself a church of the truth, but we only get the truth out of it when it's forced in front of statutory inquiries. That's our experience in this country.
Still to come, Brendan Smyth's last victim of abuse before he was sent to prison. She talks for the first time about her ordeal at Christmas in 1993. Criminal investigations in the United States exposed the huge cover-up by the Catholic Church. But as Christmas 1993 approached in Ireland, Brendan Smyth was on the run from the RUC. 18 years after Sean Brady's church inquiry, which stopped him hearing confessions, he was about to inflict an act of extreme cruelty on 12-year-old Mary. She lived just over the Cavan border, close to Smith's Abbey. At the same time in Belfast, a 21-year-old woman attempted suicide. It was her evidence that had begun the police investigation into Smyth. She was one of Seamus's 4 children, all of whom were abused by Smyth in the 1980s.
Here's a man, a cardinal, knew about it and did nothing, and did nothing, and did nothing. Brought children in for a note of silence. My daughter was 3. Could have been avoided.
Mary wasn't even born in 1975. She was 12 when Father Smyth first came into her life in the spring of 1993.
He became familiar with the parents. It wasn't unusual for him to knock when he was around or in the area that we lived in and visited next door. He would come in. He'd have a chat with my parents.
At the time, Mary and her family remained blissfully unaware that Father Smyth was on the run from police in the north, or that arrest warrants had arrived in Dublin but were never executed.
He'd been hiding out in the Republic of Ireland when he come into contact with me. And hiding out in the Abbey. Hiding out on, you know, in a sort of God house, if you like. A priest's house, a religious place.
Brendan Smyth had officiated at Seamus and his wife Bernie's marriage, and now in desperation they wanted the church to deal with Smyth. To them, no one cared, not even Cardinal Cathal. He was not taking their calls. But one day, a Monsignor Colin McCaughey answered the phone in Daly's office. He seemed sympathetic.
I just briefly threw the whole thing out to him, how we felt. That the police were looking for him. He was down south. We didn't know where he was. We're trying to get him up to answer these charges, trying to get peace of mind. So he promised to get back to me.
So while the full betrayal of trust was being felt in Belfast, over the border the grooming methods of the devious Father Smyth were paying dividends.
Got the regular pat on the leg, or if he would, you know, sort of make you laugh, or say something funny, or. But nothing until December 1993.
Silent night, holy night.
Down south, Mary's mum was expecting a child, so for Mary that meant extra duties.
Because I was the older out of all the kids. So I helped out with Christmas and stuff, and obviously with my mum being pregnant, helped a bit more and put the tree up, decorations on it, get involved with the buying of the presents, pick what you wanted, and you know, and then Father Christmas was bringing it for you, that sort of thing.
At that stage, did you still believe in Father Christmas?
Yes and no. No, but you had to get your presents.
Christmas in 1993. Obviously we were trying to enjoy Christmas. We bought the kids presents, we were getting our own presents. Just normal Christmas in a family until my daughter overdosed and was taken into hospital, and Christmas, I suppose, was put on hold while we visited her and talked to doctors and tried to figure out what the hell's going on.
Father Brendan Smyth had lost interest in Susan. She was now 21. But as she lay in a Belfast hospital in 1993 because horrific memories of Smyth controlled her life, Brendan Smyth was busy destroying another life south of the border.
It was before the Christmas Eve that he came, and it was dark outside, and he knocked at the door. It was unusual because it was later. It was going on for 9 o'clock at night. And I said my mother and father were across the road in my cousin's house, and they'd be back in a bit. He said it's okay. He wanted to come in and just have a chat with me, see if there was anything I'd like for Christmas, and I didn't see the harm to let him in.
While Smyth was busy down south at Mary's house, up in Belfast, Bernie and Seamus got what they regarded as good news from Monsignor McCaughey.
The phone call absolutely got my blood pressure sky high. The fact that this is coming to an end, he's going to be brought up, he's going to go to court.
I let him in and he came into the kitchen and was sat on the sofa. It was a black sofa And this TV was on and we were just sitting watching, and he started to get closer to me.
When Senior McCaughrean said that he would like Brendan Smyth to have his last Christmas in Kilnacrat Abbey, and it sounded to me to be a very homely thing to happen his last Christmas in the Abbey where he lived with his friends, and that he would be delivered up across the border in January.
What Seamus didn't know was that Smyth had no intention of spending time in the Abbey. Knowing that he was about to go north and face prison for his crimes against children, Smyth wanted sexual gratification just one more time.
He had pinned me to the sofa. I asked him to stop. He didn't answer me. Didn't stop. And one of the kids fell out of the bed and banged off the ceiling, which startled him, and I got up and went upstairs.
But by then he'd already...
Yeah. Yeah. He had already put his hands in places that he shouldn't have put them.
Let him have his Christmas in the Abbey. We would enjoy what we could of Christmas at home and take it on from January. That this would be the door closing. We'd have him up here, and that would be that, hopefully.
And he deserved a Christmas. He got too many Christmases. From 1975, when Cardinal Brady could have done something about him, I think he'd had his fair share of Christmases. He ruined a lot of other people's Christmases. He was left to ruin another.
It didn't occur to Seamus that Smyth was anywhere other than at the Abbey. Until now.
I feel horrified. It's horrible that he abused this young girl, but at the same time, that was his modus operandi, and nobody seemed to understand that this man was a total monster when it came to gratifying or satisfying his sexual urges.
He's not a human being. No way. I saw the devil. Not a human being. He looked through me like I was nothing. He ruined people's lives. There was nothing holy about him. If I thought for 1 second he was alive, I wouldn't be talking to you. Guys, come back and get me. I never want to see them eyeballs again.
But she did see them again. Father Smyth returned to the house after Christmas. Her mum had fallen in the snow.
He blessed my mother's pregnant tummy in front of me, knowing that I knew what he was like. I didn't understand how he could give a blessing as a priest, knowing what he was capable of, knowing what he'd just done to me.
Mary wants a criminal investigation into Cardinal Brady's failure to report Smyth to the police, and she wants his resignation.
Cardinal Brady committed an offence, a crime. He diverted the course of justice. He hurt me, he hurt every other victim by protecting Smyth and silencing them victims. He helped Smyth commit his crimes and hurt his victims, including me.
In 1975, Sean Brady risked prosecution in Northern Ireland and the Republic because of laws making it an offence not to report serious crimes to the police. Many see his inaction as part of the ongoing cover-up of Brendan Smyth by the Catholic Church hierarchy, who simply buried information about Smyth, the prolific rapist priest. Father Brendan Smyth has been resurrected by the controversy surrounding Cardinal Brady's statements in March, and more secrets may yet be unearthed. Tonight, we can reveal one of them.
I was abused by Smyth and Drogheda when I was 9. He had a car boot full of sweets to get our attention. Later, he told us during the abuse that this was God's will. I sued Gerald Cusack of Brendan Smyth's Norbertine Order, and Cardinal Sean Brady was named as a defendant. It was settled out of court in 2001 for £15,000.
Declan's revelation raises the question about just how many times the Church and Cardinal Brady have had to pay up for the sins of Father Brendan Smyth. When he was alive, Brendan Smyth thought and behaved like someone who was untouchable. During his last days of freedom, he wrote to Mary, but not to apologise.
He sent me a postcard telling me that he needed some help. He needed my prayers. He needed me to think about him. My mother read it. She said, "Oh, he must not be very well." And that was just before we saw him on the news.
Mary and her mother saw Smyth walk into court, where he would eventually be sent to jail and would never taste freedom again. These pictures show Smyth in McGilligan prison. It was here that Dr. Ian Bones could study Smyth at close quarters.
In my opinion, Brendan Smyth was a psychopath in terms of his absence of any redeemable features or treatability. He is certainly in the upper end of dangerousness. On a scale of 0 to 10, he would certainly approach the number 10.
There was never any prospect of curing Brendan Smyth. Smyth led the perfect life, raping children with no regrets.
I believe that he would have died content in what he had done over the years, happy with what he had done, and feeling entirely gratified by what he had done.
Even from his grave here at Kilnacrod Abbey, Brendan Smyth can still cause feelings of fear. The word reverend was initially on a headstone at his grave, but Samantha successfully campaigned for its removal. Samantha, along with Seamus and Mary, clearly provide evidence of Smyth's continued assaults after 1975 and right up to 1993. Still to come, the calls for Cardinal Brady to keep his promise.
Well, then I think I would resign.
Sean Brady's revelations in March disclosed in a small way the kind of measures used by bishops to cover up criminal abuses. But it exposed the Cardinal to serious questions about his role. He faced down calls for his resignation, but has been embarrassed by a comment he made last December as bishops criticised in the Murphy report considered how they should respond.
If I found myself in the situation where I was aware that my failure to act had allowed or meant that other children were abused, well, then I think I would resign.
Seamus, Mary and Samantha say the Cardinal's failings in 1975 resulted in Smyth remaining free to carry on abusing, which he did right up until 1993. The Catholic Church policy of concealing rapist priests to protect the good name of the Church has been a complete disaster. And yet, the Church still shies away from public scrutiny. After 7 months of persistent and exhaustive requests for interviews for this programme, the Catholic Church in Dublin, in Armagh and in Boston says no. We first requested interviews by telephone in late May and early June. Silence followed until we re-engaged the Church in August, exchanging emails, some of which they ignored. The Church in Boston didn't even acknowledge our emails or voice messages. Eventually, Cardinal Brady, Archbishop Dermot Martin and Ian Elliott, who heads up the Church's Child Protection Unit, told us they would not do interviews. Justine McCarthy believes Archbishop Dermot Martin has been silenced because he favoured telling the truth and was sympathetic to survivors.
He has fallen out of favour with his fellow bishops in Ireland and with the Vatican. He has stopped talking in public. He's not doing interviews with the media.
Martin's Dark Forces comment has been much quoted. This is not a commentator or a critic or an activist who's saying this. This is an archbishop with years and years of Vatican experience saying that there are dark forces in the Church working against honesty in these matters.
With no designated spokesperson to appear on camera, the church finally produced a letter detailing its child protection policies. For example, the church states it has twice updated guidelines in the past 14 years. And church policy is that anyone with a suspicion or allegation of abuse must refer the matter to the designated officer who will contact police and social services.
They've got child protection policies in place that were forced upon them, rammed down their throats by the courts, by the public, and by the media. Had that not happened, there would be no child protection policies.
The church letter also contained an answer to one of our questions by stating categorically, "There is no question but that the civil law in both jurisdictions takes precedence over canon law in this critical matter." We would have liked the opportunity to ask Cardinal Brady why he did not adhere to this in 1975. We spoke to Tom Doyle. He knows a church cover-up when he sees one.
Of course it was a cover-up. How else would you describe it? It had to, he came clean, and I have to say that much to his credit. He did publicly acknowledge what he had done when he was an underling on the way up. But that does in no way lessen the horror and the horrendous nature of that action. That could have stopped Brendan Smyth in his tracks. They could have ended the whole thing right there.
Hundreds, perhaps 1,000 children were abused by Smyth because Brady did not do the right thing.
He enabled Brendan Smyth to keep on molesting kids, and he is an accomplice. And yet what's also astonishing, what Cardinal Brady did is what we see played out in so many dioceses in the United States and in Ireland and throughout the world.
Cardinal Brady made a career decision. He chose his career above protecting the children.
And what should happen now?
He should be defrocked.
The bishops who have covered up the sexual abuse of children need to be fired. They need to be forced to resign, and they need to be prosecuted in either church courts or secular courts or both, because what they have done is just as criminal as what the perpetrators have done.
Justine McCarthy said that following the Murphy report, one bishop, James Moriarty, resigned from a position of refreshing honesty.
Now, the Murphy report actually didn't make any serious findings against him whatsoever, but the reason he gave for tendering his resignation was that he had never challenged the culture of cover-up in the church.
I want him to stand in front of me and say, "Samantha, I am really sorry that you were raped and abused and that your teenage years were taken away because I didn't do my job correctly." I want him to stand in front of me and say that.
In tonight's Inside, we've investigated the role of Cardinal Sean Brady in a scandal that's wrecked countless lives in Ireland and the United States. And amongst the victims that haven't survived are transparency and truth. Cardinal Brady stands accused, and though he doesn't stand alone, the question tonight is whether he should resign. Many people featured in tonight's Insight say yes, including Mary, who, as you've heard, was abused by Smyth 18 years after Sean Brady conducted an investigation that proved to his satisfaction that Smyth was a paedophile. Mary has sent us this letter in which she calls for the Cardinal to do the right thing. She's asked us to pass it on. The Cardinal won't meet with me, but the question tonight is, will he listen to Mary?